Okay, so back with the Challenge of Therapy podcast.
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Christine Schneider.
I'm Dr. Elizabeth Irwin.
And we are on our fourth podcast now.
Yeah.
And the topic of this one is a simple versus a complex narrative.
Okay.
Right? So my hope for the next, 15, 20 minutes is that we sort of talk about what a simple versus a complex narrative is, what each of those definitions are.
Okay.
And then we go through some client examples and we talk about when a simple narrative is important versus when a complex narrative is important.
Okay.
And then talk about some interventions to help people move from one to the other.
Okay. So identify how it might show up in clients, identify how they both can be effective, and then how do we intervene as therapists?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can always tell when you're talking to a teacher. They're like, here's the outline for the class. Fair enough. So let's start at the beginning. Define our terms.
Okay.
What's a simple versus a complex narrative?
Okay. So like the simple narrative would be very clear, like cause and effect, right? Like black and white thinking.
Okay.
The complex narrative would be more multifactorial and also kind of like the characters are more complex, right? The story has more complexity in it as to why we got to the end we got to.
Yeah, so I like the idea of like a screenplay, right? Like the simple narrative is like a simple character that just is all good or all bad. It's very linear in the plot. And then more complex narrative is a more like interwoven plot with a bunch of different things going on for a certain character.
Yeah.
So like an example that I tend to give to my clients is if I show up late to session, which by the way, I never do because I'm German. Mm-hmm. You can ask my clients, they will attest to that. But a simple narrative, if I showed up late to session, would be I was late because of traffic.
Okay.
And there may be truth to that, right? It may have, like traffic, we've all gotten stuck in traffic and ended up late, mm-hmm. right? But it's not the whole story, mm-hmm. right? Because, you know, it may also be that I was pushing the boundary and I was leaving at a time where I thought there wasn't going to be traffic. And all of a sudden there was traffic. But if I would have left earlier, I may have beat the traffic altogether.
Right.
Or I may have thought there was traffic because I'm speeding and I'm trying to go around people. Right. And so the more complex narrative probably has a different attribution of blame. Right. So before it was all the traffic's fault and I wasn't taking any accountability. In a more complex narrative, there may be different accountability proportion for me versus the external control.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
Like when you take in the complexity of it, it's like the question might become, isn't there usually traffic around that time? Like, why do we not account for traffic at that time? Like a couple of different factors that might kind of make a more interesting story.
Yeah, interesting and one that has less helplessness. Because if it is just traffic, I can't do anything to stop it.
Right.
But if I also left a little late, now I may have to take the ego hit of accountability, but I also may be able to plan and do something different to have agency.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So what would be a good client example of this if we stop psychoanalyzing my driving patterns? Again, always on time.
So I think a good client example I always go to a family model of this. And with the family model, I just tend to see it as like when a family comes in and there's a very clear identified client, there's a clear scapegoat in the family. Mm-hmm. If we fix this kid, right, if we fix this person, everything else in the family would be fine.
Right.
The more complex version of that is, so for some reason, one reason or another, each member of the family seems to fit into one of these roles. And that comes with a lot of complexity. Why do we need to put our family members in roles?
Yeah. So I have a 12-year-old who's having anger issues. Mm-hmm. And, well, is the kid just a bad kid? Or is he hitting a developmental stage that maybe the parents struggled with? Or is he pushing boundaries and the parents are struggling, like what's going on in a more complex narrative.
Yeah, and then even if we look at that kid through the complex lens, he keeps hitting his sister, which is not okay. But on the other hand, maybe he's really struggling with a lot of pain inside. And so to hold both the behavior along with the complexity of what he's feeling, complex narrative.
Makes sense. Total sense. So the way you're making it sound is simple is bad and complex is good.
Which is a simple narrative.
Fair enough. But there has to be some simple narratives that are true, right? Like safety is good.
Right.
Right? Yeah. Like if I feel safe, I should leave. Right?
Yeah.
And even in those sometimes, though, we have to kind of pick it apart. Right?
Yeah.
Like I may say something to my clients about like, okay, you don't feel safe in your relationship. Maybe you do need to leave. That may be part of it. Let's also figure out what you're bringing to it that makes you feel unsafe and what the other person's bringing to it that makes them seem unsafe to you, right? Mm-hmm. And so, because, it may still be the right move to leave, but understanding complexity versus they're unsafe, I need to get out.
Right.
Although maybe that's a good thing. Maybe there's a time and place for the safe narrative or the simple narrative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think about, when we think about like any kind of abusive relationship and basically the confusion that can come from being in an abusive relationship, right? Mm-hmm. So in those moments when you're just trying to move away from the abuse, you need a simple narrative that you're going to follow.
Right, because you can't be like, well, he or she is hitting me, but, they had a bad relationship with their father and blah, 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 blah. If you're unsafe, a simple narrative says, I'm unsafe, I deserve to be safe, I need to leave.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
The problem may happen not as you're leaving. The problem may not be in the construction of the simple narrative. It may be in keeping it too long.
Oh, good point. So like after safety is like you are no longer in physical danger, right? You've left the relationship and then you're still holding on to the simple narrative. What would that block you from?
Well, so let's think about, and again, just using an example I've seen, a dozen times. I left my husband because he was addicted to porn.
Okay.
Now, again, very simple narrative. My husband was addicted to porn. I left.
Right.
It's very much like the traffic narrative, right? Mm-hmm. And again, if that was something that caused them to leave a relationship, simple narrative, motivating, out. But if they're going to keep that narrative going into the next relationship, number one, they may say something like, I'm never going to date an addict again, which of course, I'm not sure that you can totally assess for that, right? But second of all, it doesn't give them any ability to look at their own part in the dynamic, right? And so if we take the simple addiction model, well, if they were addicted, it may be helpful to say, what kind of codependency did I have around the addiction? Were there warning signs I didn't pick up on? What was going on in my life that allowed this to happen? Why didn't I set boundaries earlier? All of these sorts of things that, may help them grow and develop into the next relationship.
Because that creates self-agency, right? Because when you're able to look at yourself and say, how can I trust myself to move into the next relationship? You look at the more complex narrative.
Yeah, right? And so, yes, we have to look at when's a simple narrative, life affirming would maybe be the best way to put it. Psychologically sound or life affirming, right? Yeah. And so, one simple narrative that I tend to hold firm to is the fault of the violence is always on the violent.
Sure.
And that doesn't mean, I always use the sort of addiction line of, you can't make somebody drink, but you can make them pretty thirsty, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying there's not complexity, but again, the fault of the violence is always on the violence.
Right.
A simple narrative, but again, I think when it comes to violence and safety, simplicity is important, right?
Yeah.
So there may be times, I guess I'm asking, are there times, how do you assess if a simple narrative is necessary or it's time to get your client and help them develop a more complex narrative?
I was thinking about, like, when I've been talking to clients and they keep going back to the simple narrative, and it seems to be causing a stuck place, not a place of growth anymore.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to be helping them motivate towards something. It now feels like it's keeping them from feeling safe in themselves and in the world at this point.
Yeah, the problem is sometimes it can feel super invalidating to clients when they have this simple narrative and you start to sort of help them to realize like the place is keeping them stuck and try to shift them into a more complex narrative.
Yeah.
If I'm saying to you, look, my dad was an absolute and total jerk who hit me all the time, and I start to say, okay, got it. What do we need before we move that from a simple narrative to a complex narrative? Because if we go straight into, yeah, but let's look at his trauma history, well, that can feel super invalidating to somebody who's been abused.
It's making me think, like, it honestly makes me think of the polyvagal theory.
Okay.
Like, when we're able to calm, when we're able to move into parasympathetic activation, when we're in sympathetic activation, we need, like, do this now.
Right? Good point.
Yeah. And so when
we're in fight or flight, like the simple narrative probably is what our brain can come up with. Like we're not built, so we're like, oh, well, I bet the bear is hungry.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe they shouldn't. Maybe they need a meal, and maybe I'm the meal.
Exactly. They need to feed their cubs.
like the simple narrative is bear is running. I need to get away.
Exactly.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And so when we're in that sympathetic activation, the therapist, we can't come in and say, well, let's look at it from different sides, because we're actually, I think, asking them in our best selves to say, I want to help you feel safe in the world. And for example, I'm wondering if a little bit of the reason that you did get stuck in this relationship, once again, the violence was never your fault, but I'm wondering if you didn't believe for one reason or another that you deserved to protect yourself when you first saw the signs.
Yeah.
And so I want to be able to explore these concepts with you, because I want you to be able to fully trust yourself and believe that you are fully deserving of a healthy relationship moving forward. So the next time that you see these signs, we know exactly what you're going to do.
Right. So it's sort of like, I hear you saying, once the parasympathetic, once the danger is over and the nervous system can go parasympathetic, then after validating the fear and the trauma of the actual events,
which decreases
sympathetic activation. And once the client feels really heard, it may be time to say, look, I'm for you, and I want you to be able to learn the lessons from this so that you feel better, a better sense of agency going forward.
Well, I think the mistake that you're kind of speaking to, that of course we've all made as therapists, right? We've misread the situation, and we lean in and say, maybe a little bit too early, let's explore this from a few different lenses.
Mm-hmm.
And you see this like protective
right. What are you saying?
Exactly. And that makes total sense. I totally get that. Because it's not in sympathetic activation where we're able to collaborate and even play. We play with ideas in parasympathetic activation. Mm-hmm. We trust safety, and we trust that this therapist is on our side. So we can kind of like play with some ideas together. And in that play, that only increases flexibility, which only increases safety.
Yeah. And there is a lot of healing to be had. Because one of the things I really struggle with the simple narrative is that it still makes it about the other person.
Yeah.
And so, I talk a lot about spotlight therapy, right? Like, where's the spotlight in the therapy room? And so if the simple narrative is my dad was an asshole who always beat me, that tells me a lot about your dad's experience and very little about yours.
Yeah.
Right? And so a more complex narrative may be, dad beat me, and here's what it felt like to be me in that.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And as we start going through, here's how it felt to be me. I don't know about you, but as the complexity of the injury comes out, very often the person will say something like, I think what I realized about dad is that his dad beat him, or that blah, 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 blah. And that's not to let dad off the hook, but it's to depersonalize this actually wasn't about me.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so sometimes the complex narrative can really open up possibilities to help the client explore their own hurt, but also to gain empathy and understanding for the other person.
Well put. Well put. It's almost like by risking putting the spotlight on the client, they then are able to think about the perspective of the other person without devaluing their experience.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so what are the techniques you use? Well, before we even go there, is a complex narrative ever bad?
I think the complex narrative is bad in these situations. I think that sometimes the complex narrative can actually function to keep us from acting in our own best interest.
Yeah. Tell me how.
Like when I think about an abused partner, right? Like you can see this, oh man, just even thinking about the clients on our sofa sometimes, you can see them struggling with, well, shouldn't I have empathy for him? I think he's going through a lot. There's something where they need to stay in, I am sympathetically active. I am in fight or flight at the moment.
Right.
I need to make a decision that's in my own best interest so that I feel strong right now.
Yeah.
And it seems like they can't land anywhere and their ground keeps shaking underneath them because the complex narrative isn't helping them.
No, that makes total sense, right? And so we've talked a little bit about how to get people out of a simple to a complex narrative, and that engaging the parasympathetic nervous system, making them know this is a way of helping them to be more seen and validated, not less,
Right.
and helping them to develop agency and resources in the world.
Right.
What do you do when you're trying to get somebody from a complex to a simple narrative?
Usually in those moments, I mean, they are in kind of a fight or flight place, right? Mm-hmm. So in some ways, therapy becomes very therapy 101, right? We focus on the emotion that they're feeling.
Yeah.
And we don't get lost in all the different narratives at some point. We just allow space for contained feeling of the emotion. You're really scared right now.
Yeah, it is interesting how you can use either the simple or the complex narrative to disengage from your emotional experience.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And so I think you're right that the trailhead is always going to the emotion. Yeah. It seems like once the person gets to the emotion and can tolerate the emotion, if it needs to be simple, it goes to simple. If it needs to be complex, it goes to complex.
Yeah.
Okay. So how did we do on our outline? We defined our terms. We came up with client examples.
Right.
And we came up with interventions. I think we did good. Are we done here?
Yes, it's class is over.
Class is over. Except for, this is one of those weird classes where instead of people just talking in the middle of class, they have to use comments to talk to us and tell us what we're doing right or wrong.
That is funny, yeah. It's you can't ask us questions right after. You have to leave a comment.
Right, exactly. And, hopefully there'll be a complex narrative comment. All right. Well, thank you very much. And we'll catch you next time.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye.